I'd like to get us started. So like I said before, my name is Kyle Gatlin. I'm the Partner Resource Manager here with the Virginia Conservation Network, and I would like to welcome all of you to our 2023 Common Agenda Briefing Book Educational Series. As with each year, our Common Agenda is put together by over 150 plus network partners, and this year we have 38 issue papers. Each Thursday during the month of October and the first week of November, between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m., we'll be having the education series each Thursday. And they will be going through the 5 briefing book chapters, which are the Clean Water and Flood Resilience chapter, which is today, the Land and Wildlife Conservation chapter, the Land Use and Transportation. Last week's was the Climate and Energy, and then finally, Good Governance. And once again, those will be Thursday, and we'll be joined by authors who wrote papers for said chapters. Like I said, today will be the Clean Water and Flood Resilience Education Week. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Pat.
Good morning. Thanks, Kyle. My name is Pat Calvert. I'm your Senior Policy Campaigns Manager for VCN, covering land conservation and clean water. It's my privilege today to be able to introduce folks who have been working diligently for many months to draft policy papers for clean water. And we'll start that off today with a focus on clean water and the Chesapeake Bay. Anna Killius with James River Association and Dr. Joe Wood of CBF are going to be talking about restoring the Chesapeake Bay and the 3 big sectors where we really need to focus and target on reducing pollution loads. And then afterwards, we'll hand it over to Karen Forget, our board chair of VCN at Lynnhaven River Now, and she'll be speaking about the Albemarle-Pamlico Watershed. If you have questions for the speakers, if you will, you look down at the bottom, you've got hopefully a little Q&A box. Put those in there, and after presentations have been given, we'll spend a few minutes to pose questions to our presenters. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it right over to Anna.
Thanks, Pat. So I'm going to just share some slides real quick, but Joe is going to kick us off.
Thanks, Anna. So Anna and I are kind of tag teaming this. I'm just going to start by giving a status update of where we are with Chesapeake Bay restoration. The Chesapeake Bay is, really a critical resource to our region. We know that it's worth over $100 billion of services every year, from flood mitigation to a variety of benefits. And it's been really degraded for, over 50 years. And we've known that. We've been working on bay restoration for a really long time. And we've, hit some speed bumps. We've ran into a lot of challenges. We've made some progress too. We started a cleanup plan in 2010 that was supposed to be done by 2025. And, over the last 10 or 15 years, we've made really tremendous strides, largely in the wastewater sector. Over 90% of our reductions have come, our pollution reductions for nutrients and sediments have come from upgrades at wastewater treatment plants. So, check that box. We did that really well. We think there's a few more of those out there that are coming, partly due to some legislation passed recently. And just, tremendous success there that has immediate benefits that we see in water quality. We see the system responding to those changes. Stormwater, that's a challenge. We've done some really good things in Virginia. We have actually pretty strong permits. They're being reissued more slowly than we would like, but they are good permits. And we've been investing in the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, and that's made a difference. Still, the sector at large, though, is growing, and that's it's largely because we're still building houses, we're still doing things, we're still expanding, and so that's a real challenge. And then agriculture, the largest source. Our agricultural cost share program has been ramped up over the past few years. We are investing more recently than we have ever done before, but still it hasn't achieved nearly the level of reductions that we need. And so, that's a critical point going forward. We look back 90% of our reductions come from wastewater. We look forward, that kind of flips to agriculture. All the reductions need to come from agriculture in the future. That's kind of where the opportunities are. So we've made some strides, we hit some speed bumps, but there's some real challenges out there that are coming too. Specifically, we're still growing. That's definitely a big one. Climate change is a huge threat for the Bay. We have, increasing precipitation levels, increased intensity in precipitation, rising sea levels. All those things make addressing cleaning up the Bay much more difficult. And so we're still wrestling with that. So, there are a variety of ways that the state can invest in that. And I'm going to kick it to Anna to talk about, the things that we specifically think that are needed in terms of investments for these programs. So go ahead, Anna.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. So starting with wastewater, we have done great work on wastewater, but we still have a ways to go on certain facilities that have not updated to use more modern technology. There's a list of those facilities that was identified in a bill known as the Enhanced Nutrient Removal Certainty Program. And now the state needs to go through the process of funding the projects that were included in that list in the Enhanced Nutrient Removal Certainty Program. So we expect to see funding needs to get those projects done between now and really, the next 3 to 5 years. DEQ recently identified that need to be as much as $230 million within this budget. So we may see some significant budget requests in wastewater. For stormwater, we have a ton of localities that have to do a lot of work between now and the end of their permits to get stormwater management practices on the ground that will meet their pollution reduction goals. In order to get those projects done, they need a lot of state help. And fortunately, we have the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, which helps localities cover the cost of putting those stormwater management practices on the ground. It provides state matching funds to get the work done. And if you are a fiscally stressed community, it can help out even more. We are asking for continued funding of the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund at a level that we've estimated is necessary in order to reach our stormwater pollution reduction goals for the stormwater sector. And on the screen, it shows you that's $80 million. We also want to hold the line. $2 million was included for what's known as the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program that helps with smaller projects within our developed areas. We want to keep that funding right where it is right now in the budget. And then finally, we have agriculture. Virginia's agriculture cost share program helps split the cost of implementing what are called best management practices on farmland to keep nutrients on their soil, to keep their soil on their land and out of our streams and rivers. That program has received record funding in recent years, but we're still not on pace to meet those goals in that sector. So we know that inflation is hitting our farmers and this program pretty hard right now. It's making those practices much more costly to put on the ground. So we expect that there is a need to put more money into that program, even beyond what's already there. And according to DCR, that money could be as much as $100 million in this budget. So we are going to see some significant asks for that program as well, in addition to the great work we've already done in getting that, that program funded last year. And then finally, the last bullet, there's a ton of regulations and laws on the books that are meant to keep the pollution from these three sectors down, to keep the pollution from reaching our rivers and streams. We need to keep those regulations and those laws on the books and strong, and where possible, even stronger, because it's a really critical time. And if we start rolling those things back now, we are only going to make our job harder for reaching our goals. And that wraps up our policy solutions.
All right, thanks, Joe and Anna. I've got no questions for you right now, but you have opportunity to put those in there. Since a lot of these asks are going to be budget related, I should also highlight that on October 27th, Anna will be joining us for a how to work the budget, how to advocate effectively for the budget, and how the heck does the budget process work in Virginia. It's not necessarily something that's intuitive. So join that on October 27th if you can. And since the Bay gets a lot of attention and has for decades, we also need to bring attention to many of the other watersheds within Virginia that may not get quite the same attention. And Karen has long been an advocate for the Albemarle-Pamlico watershed in Virginia. And I'm going to hand it right over to Karen.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Albemarle-Pamlico a little bit this morning, and for the opportunity to have this paper in the common agenda. The Albemarle-Pamlico in coastal Virginia and North Carolina is the second largest estuary in the United States. It's beautiful and bountiful. It's full of oysters and many varieties of fish, rich wetlands, migrating waterfowl, maritime forests, and beautiful open waters. Anyone who has visited Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge or the North Landing River or the Outer Banks of Virginia, the Outer Banks of North Carolina have enjoyed the Albemarle-Pamlico watershed. Like its cousin in the Chesapeake Bay, it's very vulnerable to farm runoff, hog lagoons, coal ash storage, development, loss of vital habitat, and ever increasing sea level rise, storm activity. So 25% of Virginia's land area is part of the Albemarle-Pamlico, and it stretches from Roanoke to the coast of Virginia. So all the way across the south side of Virginia, from Roanoke to Virginia Beach. Virginia currently has a memo of understanding with North Carolina to plan for the long-term health of the Albemarle-Pamlico. But we have in Virginia, neither the information that we need to plan effectively and be a partner, an equal partner with North Carolina, nor have we really put any resources into our planning and meeting the needs of the communities, the farmers, and others in this part of the state. So many areas of the Albemarle-Pamlico area of the state, Southside Virginia, are low income and have very high minority populations. So historically, it's been a pretty easy, I hate to say it, but it's really been a pretty easy part of the state for people to ignore. But also some of the most devastating flooding in Virginia's history has been in the Albemarle-Pamlico part of the state, and that is not going to decrease with sea level rise and increased storm activity. So in the bill that we have in the common agenda this year, we are asking for three things. One is a comprehensive study of this part of the state. We really need baseline data, the very kind of practical information that's needed to plan effectively for this part of the state and to assess the needs of the communities, the farmers, and others in this part of the state. And also to help us be an effective partner with North Carolina in long-term planning for the Albemarle-Pamlico. The second thing we're asking for is for the state to look at cost share funding for the communities and farmers in the Albemarle-Pamlico part of the state. Once those needs have been identified, how can we move forward to really help to meet the needs of those communities? And thirdly, we're asking the state to establish a roundtable that would include community leaders and others across the Albemarle-Pamlico from Roanoke to the coast to look at environmental justice issues as well as the needs of these communities, how these communities are responding to increased flooding pressure and other threats to the Albemarle-Pamlico. We think that all of this work could be accomplished with an investment of between $1 and $2 million on the part of the state toward the Albemarle-Pamlico as a beginning point to really understanding the value and importance of this part of the state and the benefits that it brings to our state and our region. And, you know, our long-term goal is really to be able to be an effective partner with North Carolina in planning for and protecting the vitality of the Albemarle-Pamlico estuary and the bounty of the Albemarle-Pamlico estuary. So I'm happy to take any questions that people might have, but you know, we think that this relatively small investment of $1 to $2 million at this point in standing up a roundtable and this study would give us the baseline information and a beginning point to start to really plan effectively for this 25% of Virginia.
Thanks much, Karen. Appreciate that. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to use the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. Monique posed a question, whether or not regional greenhouse gas initiative funds revenues would help support any of these programs. And I'll open that up to our presenters to answer.
So the Community Flood Preparedness Fund is available in all of the 3 major watersheds in Virginia. So in the Chesapeake Bay, in the Albemarle-Pamlico, and in Southwest Virginia, those funds are available. But, you know, as we all know, the part of accessing those funds is to have the staff support and the understanding and the, you know, the ability at the community level to be able to pull that off. So there are a lot of people working really hard to help low income and less resource communities take advantage of that fund.
Anna, Joe, did any RGGI revenues assist with stormwater, wastewater, or ag?
So that same Community Flood Preparedness Fund can be used for projects that help treat stormwater and prevent it from flooding local communities. However, the programs that I talked about are largely funded in a different way. They receive money through what's called the Water Quality Improvement Fund, and the bulk of that funding comes from when we have surpluses. So when we take in more tax money in a year than we anticipated, and then we quite frankly spent. And so all that surplus money gets put together, banked together, and 10% of that comes to water quality programs like the ones that I described. So different funding source.
Yeah, I would just
Go ahead, Joe.
I would just say, like, for the local match for SLAF, maybe there's some overlap there that could potentially happen, but like completely agree with that. The only other thing I would say is, like, when thinking about RGGI and these, you know, RGGI is a great thing for water quality too, for nutrient issues too. And so I know the question was about funds, but there is that overlap of benefit of RGGI for Bay, Atlantic, any nutrient kind of issue. So.
Aaron, did you have anything else to add?
No, I was just going to add that the Ag BMP cost share programs are also available statewide. I think 70% of it is earmarked for the Bay watershed. The other 30% goes to the rest of the state. And so those funds are available for people in Southwest Virginia and also in the Albemarle-Pamlico. But again, it you know, some of it comes down to, you know, do they even know these programs are available? Are they organized enough to make to take advantage of this. And that's, we have to really start from the ground up in the AP watershed, I think, in helping to organize communities, helping to inform people, helping to, having people on the ground to work with farmers and communities to help them understand what is available to them and how they can make use of that funding.
Thank you, Karen. Well, I have no more questions. If some pop into your head, you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A and we can come back to them later, but without, we'll just keep on moving along. Plastics have been, plastics and marine debris have certainly been a big discussion over the past several General Assembly sessions, as well as a variety of toxins. Elly Boehmer from Environment Virginia is now Elly Boehmer Wilson. Congratulations. She's going to talk to us about reducing plastic pollution and also something that's been called advanced recycling. We don't use that term though, because it's just, well, you'll learn about it here shortly. And then we'll hear from Anna Killius from JRA again about how to tackle some of our toxic pollutants. Elly, it's all yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Pat. I am going to share my screen so that I can share some slides. It's not letting me share it. Let me see. For some reason, my settings aren't letting me share it, so I am actually going to share this link and then maybe somebody else can share it for me while I start talking. So one second, I'm sorry, folks. Okay, sorry, my computer has not set up me the ability to share my screen for some reason on this. But yes, so I'll be chatting about our plastic pollution policies and some greenwashing that's going on that has been claiming to be a solution to this. So as many of you know, because this is one of our most visible pollutants, single-use plastics are really bad for our environment. They have a bad effect on our communities with litter around, but also harm our waterways and the wildlife that call our waterways home. There's also an increased threat of things like microplastics in our waterways, and the implication that that actually has on our health. So we are using more and more plastic than ever, but unfortunately, less than 10% of this is actually recycled. So our goals is to reduce the amount of overall plastic that we're actually even consuming so that the down the stream issues become less immediate and emergency level. So there's currently a disconnect between the people that design our products, the people that are designing products that are only meant to be used for a few minutes, and the people that actually have to manage the waste. This disconnect means a lot of the plastic that we use actually can't be recycled in our communities. And we're seeing this even more so with other types of single-use products as well. So in a lot of places across Virginia, they're losing recycling access for all sorts of materials, including things like glass, that actually is really has a high potential to be recycled. And then there's also a lack of incentive to properly dispose of waste, and then a lack of the recycling infrastructure to manage all the materials that we have. So we have way too much plastic to manage. There's the people who are making products have nothing to do with managing the waste after. And then there's a lack of incentive to actually dispose of stuff, to actually keep litter out of our environment. So that's what our policy solutions are all about. The first policy solution we have pertains to a victory that we had a few years ago, or a couple of years ago now, is a ban on foam cups on takeout containers. We passed this ban and it was set to go into effect for large restaurants, large chain restaurants in January of 2023, so just a couple months. Fortunately, that was delayed by 5 years in the last General Assembly. This is a crazy delay. There was already a generous delay when the bill was originally passed. There's also a hardships clause in the bill. So this should not make any business go out of business by, doing the right thing for the environment. So one of the top priorities is to eliminate this harmful type of plastic and actually have that ban go into effect as soon as possible. The second is to establish a producer responsibility program. So a producer responsibility program is actually a concept that we use quite often. There's over 100 laws, EPR laws across the country, but they have to deal with things like paint, e-waste, mercury in your thermometers, things like that. And it basically holds the producer physically or financially responsible for the product to the end of its useful life. And what this actually does is ensure that the products people are making aren't, one, nearly as wasteful. So it reduces the amount of packaging and plastic that they're actually using in their products. But then it also makes them, or incentivizes them or penalizes them. You could look at it either way. It penalizes them if they have non-recyclable materials that a county or a city can't actually manage. But it also incentivizes them to use more reusable things that can be repaired or reused or ultimately recycled if that's where it ends up. Our third priority is to establish a beverage container deposit program. So this doesn't necessarily reduce at the source the products that we have, but it ensures a robust recycling system. And most importantly, it incentivizes the collection. So a lot of the litter issues we have right now, it has nothing to do with whether or not we have recycling. People are not throwing their cans out the window of their car because there's not a recycling bin somewhere. Unfortunately, litter happens, and one really good way to encourage people to, one, not litter, or two, pick up litter is by having a beverage container deposit program. It's oftentimes referred to as a bottle bill in a lot of places. And so you pay a deposit when you get a single-use beverage container. So everything from cans to water bottles to wine bottles, these can cover all sorts of beverage containers. And when you actually go to recycle it at the end, or if you don't and somebody else does for you, you get that deposit back. And so having a high enough deposit is really important because you actually need to incentivize someone. And then having actual benchmarks. And this applies for the extended producer responsibility program as well, but actually having benchmarks that we have oversight on these programs to ensure that we're actually hitting rates of source reduction, or in the case of the bottle bill, actual collection rates. Oregon's a really good example of this. They have an 85% collection rate with their bottle bill program, which is something we should definitely strive for. And then a last one is to expand and properly fund the litter tax. And so this does kind of deal with the fact that there is litter ultimately, and it comes from a lot of single-use products. So the places that sell these products currently, they pay into the litter tax, but at a rate that is so low compared to other states and has not kept up with inflation. So we need to properly fund this so that we can deal with the litter that we do have in our environment and fund some really great programs to remove this from our environment, and also to give more accessibility to a lot of the people that are actually doing this work already, a lot of people that are educating people about it and doing the cleanups themselves. A lot of that is from nonprofits, and it is more difficult for nonprofits to access this fund. So there are ways for us to just make it more inclusive and go to help the people that are really working to get the litter out of our environment. So those are our policy solutions for reducing plastic pollution for this year. Now I'm going to go into talking a little bit about some false solutions, and probably the biggest false solution that we have continued to see over the last couple of years is what we call chemical conversion. The industry would call it chemical recycling or advanced recycling. So chemical conversion is touted as a solution to the plastic crisis. But when we think about solutions to the plastics crisis, we think first and foremost, does it reduce the amount of plastic we're using? And the answer to that with this solution is no, it doesn't. It actually requires more and more plastic to become a feasible solution. So off the bat, that goes against what we're working for. We want to reduce the amount of plastics that we're using overall, because we know that that's the best way to keep plastic out of our environment. So chemical conversion actually breaks down plastics that you would recycle, and it turns it into fuel or other chemicals or downgraded plastic. But primarily, this is this is a plastics to fuel operation. And so those become like additives into jet fuel and things like that. Now, in Virginia, we have made a commitment to 100% renewable energy. And the fact that we are turning plastics and turning it into make more fuel really goes against our goals to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And the fact that we need more and more plastic to make this industry even create something in the end is really, really problematic. And so that is why we do not support this and other solutions that encourage us using more plastic as being something that we should do here in Virginia. In Virginia, we have had a facility be proposed before. They took a decent amount of taxpayer money to bring them to Virginia, and they have already left. So we have not actually seen that this is even something that would be good economically for the state. So we already know it's bad environmentally, but has not actually shown to be something that works economically as well. So our policy solutions around this are, one, plastics to fuel should not be considered recycling in state code. That is not recycling, turning plastics into additives for jet fuel. That is not what people think when they are putting a plastic water bottle in the recycling bin, that's actually what's going to happen, because we do know that that is not great for the environment. We need to require an environmental justice impact analysis. Like a lot of things when it comes like landfills and other facilities, they're oftentimes near low income and communities of color. And this is problematic because there is increased air pollution, there is increased impacts to these communities. And so this needs to be something that is considered if any of these facilities do come to Virginia. And no taxpayer money should go to private plastics to fuel corporations. This isn't something that us as Virginia should be supporting, especially if it ultimately is not going to be economically feasible. We've already seen it once in Virginia that we've given taxpayer money and this didn't even work out. So we should not continue to do that ever. And then the last solution is to pursue all the real solutions that I've already talked about. Those are the best ways to keep litter and plastics out of our environment. And we should be focusing on proven solutions that have worked for decades, rather than experimental technology that goes against what we're trying to do when looking at the environment as a whole. So happy to answer any questions about any of that when we get to that portion.
Excellent. Thank you, Elly. Appreciate all that. We will, after the next section, we'll come back to some questions, and there's 3 of them posted already, so keep them coming. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it right over to Anna Killius to tell us about some of the toxic substances.
Thanks, Pat, and hopefully I got it right this time. Toxics, we are bringing to your attention 2 sources of chemical contamination that can endanger our communities and our environment. The first is per and polyfluoral alkyl substances, or more commonly called Pfas. These are man-made chemicals that have a lot of commercial and industrial uses to make things non-stick or water resistant, or to be used in things like firefighting foams. But once PFAS are introduced into our environment, they can bioaccumulate in our bodies or in wildlife, and they can persist. They don't break down, and they've been linked to some harmful human health impacts. This graphic shows the many different ways that the many different pathways for PFAS exposure to reach the environment or ourselves. And even if you can't read all the words, I think it's pretty clear from all the lines that there are many risks to PFAS exposure. Direct discharge from industrial users or wastewater plants, leaching from landfills or from biosolids that have been spread onto farm fields, and PFAS contaminated food packaging or coatings that are regularly used by restaurants or brought into our homes. So EPA has a roadmap for addressing PFAS, but largely these are still unregulated chemical contaminants that are not being addressed in Virginia. The other class of chemicals that we are taking on are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. These chemicals are carcinogenic, they're cancer causing, and they occur in coal and crude oil. When road and driveway sealants use coal tar as a sealant, that can expose nearby households to PAH contaminated dust. Nearby streams can also be contaminated when that PAH gets leached into stormwater and runs off those roads as well. The good news is that there are cost-effective alternatives for coal tar sealants that don't have to include these PAH levels. And studies show that when you make the switch, you can see some pretty immediate results in lowering the level of PAH in the environment. So here are our policy solutions to tackle PFAS and PAH contamination. First, require industrial PFAS users to disclose and to control all chemicals being released in their discharges. So when they're pre-treating their wastewater to go into our rivers, they need to be controlling PFAS at the source. We need to fund our environmental regulators and our conservation agencies to identify and eliminate potential pathways for PFAS contamination. We should establish drinking water standards for PFAS and other toxic chemicals to make sure our drinking water facilities are testing for and eliminating this. And we need to provide a local option that will give communities the ability to regulate or prohibit road sealants that contain PAH from being used within their communities. And that's it.
Thank you, Anna. So we've got some questions posted here. Appreciate that. Keep them coming if you've got them. So far, we've got 4 here. So Jocelyn asks, and I believe this is for Elly. This is even before the disconnect between design and management. Is there any action being taken to reduce plastics at the source? For example, manufacturers of plastic bottles, plastic packaging, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So in our principles, again, the first thing is to eliminate the most harmful types of single-use plastics. And so I think foam is like a really good example of that and actually banning it outright. And then from there, the source reduction, it does actually come into the extended producer responsibility. By one aspect of those bills is to actually have mandates on reducing the amount of plastic manufacturers use in their products, particularly with like packaging and things like that. And then also the way that extended producer responsibility is set up by having fees for the more littered and more difficult to recycle plastics, it penalizes them to continue to use a single-use plastic. And so it would shift, and we've seen with like other products or in other countries that do this, it actually shifts the materials to be something more sustainable on a systematic basis. So the goal of that and how it should play out is it would reduce at the source and change the materials that manufacturers use by penalizing them if they choose to have a product that can't be managed in a sustainable way in where they're selling it.
Great, thanks, Elly. Jim has a question, and so it's a little bit long here. The US EPA is poised to propose a rule on or about November 16th of this year that will allow wastewater treatment plants to generate valuable credits under the federal Renewable Fuel Standard Program for electricity that they generate with sewage-based biogas. The way the rule is written will be important to wastewater treatment plants, but especially those that are using or would like to use their biogas-based electricity on site in order to reduce their consumption of grid electricity. The question is who at VCN or similar groups would be interested in this issue. I will add on to here that I know that our climate and energy work group, there are various partners that are looking at biogas proposals that have been coming out since at least last session. So I'll open that up to anyone who might wish to respond.
Well, I can start. This isn't an issue that I've worked a ton on, but I do know that sort of our thought on this is if we need to create more and have more of an environmental impact in order for this to work, then it's not really considered a green solution or a renewable source. And so it's sort of similar to the chemical conversion, where it's like, if we need to increase the amount of plastics that we need, then that is not actually helping us to solve this issue. So obviously we want to reduce the amount of carbon emitting, and by getting, if it's not actually a renewable source, then it's not actually helpful for us. So I don't know if others like have more to say about the biogases, but I know this has come up with like composting and things like that as well. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about it. If we need to increase the amount in order to make it sustainable, then it is not actually as helpful in the long run. But I don't know if other people have more to add to that. This isn't my area of expertise though.
Same here. The James River Association is not as active on biogas, but I think through VCN and the network of partners, we can probably find you the groups that are taking on biogas, and they can speak more educatedly on this.
Thank you. There was one request, Elly, for your email. If you won't mind, if you don't mind putting that in the chat, somebody may have a question for you to follow up on. Elly, I think this one might be for you as well. So this is about the TREX bench method of reusing plastics and whether or not it's beneficial.
I think that there's, I think it's an interesting idea, and I know that it does keep plastic bags out of landfills, which is great. And they have recycled, tens of thousands of pounds of plastic bags and film recycling. I don't think that it is a long-term solution for us when we recycle plastic, even in that way. It is not the most efficient means, but between the collection, the cleaning, and all of that, we do know that so many more plastic bags that even get put in those like the bins for a lot of grocery stores have like their Trek bins and stuff. A lot of those actually don't ultimately end up going to Treks. So we are producing way too much, and it is not, we don't have enough places to put benches to deal with the amount of plastic bags that we have, essentially. So that actually doesn't keep it out of our environment by reducing at the source. It's a cool solution to, if we do ultimately need to use some plastic, how can we have more long-lasting things come out of it? But I don't think it is by any means a solution to keeping litter out of our environment.
Thanks, Elly. Well said. Marshall Jones. Hey, Marshall, good to see you. He asked a question. Do we know what proportion of plastics collected at the community recycle facilities actually get recycled versus ultimately ending up in a landfill?
This is a bit of a trickier kind of number to figure out. I know ultimately only less than 10% of plastic actually gets recycled. So that's kind of the answer. If you're putting in however much you're putting in your bin, just kind of look at that and think, no, only like 10% of this plastic that's in here ultimately would get recycled, and that's nationwide. So what we do know is that a lot of plastic that goes to those facilities ultimately ends up getting incinerated or put to the landfill, the majority of it. So it's a little bit more difficult because we have some private companies as well as county and stuff. We do know the rates at which Virginians recycle. We do have mandates around that, which are pretty good rates, but we don't actually ultimately have the infrastructure to recycle all those goods.
I believe Virginia Clean Waterways also released a report very recently, and I will look for that link to, I believe it's linked in our briefing book, but we'll share that in the chat here once I track it down. Well, that concludes that portion, but don't go away yet. There was a question about Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative revenues and where those funds can go. And in the next section on flood and climate resiliency, Jay Ford of Chesapeake Bay Foundation is going to cover sequestering carbon and what's being called blue carbon, and then also talk about our statewide flood risk and how to manage it, mitigate it, reduce it. So I'm going to hand it right over to Mr. Ford.
All right. Hi, everyone. I know I am the one standing between you and the end of this presentation, so I'm going to keep it quick and poppy. And I like to pretend that I can see some of you, even though I can't. So I may randomly recognize people as we go. So I have the job today of talking a bit about our resilience paper and as well as our paper on carbon sequestration. And then I'm going to start with resilience today. And I guess I'll first just say what we mean by resilience. And you're on a VCN call. So when we're talking about resilience, we are talking about the ability for our communities around Virginia to respond to climate change impacts and to do so in a way that does not denigrate our natural resources. And so we are really hyper focused on that part of the Venn diagram where our communities can deal with excess water that's brought about from climate impacts, as well as protecting water quality and some of our precious resources on the land as well. So the challenge, quite frankly, is immense, and it's statewide. When we look at what climate change is doing to Virginia, that takes different forms in different communities. If you're in coastal Virginia or rural coastal Virginia, that may mean increased storm surge. It may mean that even when you don't get hit by a hurricane, school is closed for 3 days, like it was in my region last week. It means that we're seeing increased sea level rise, but we're also seeing more intense rainfall events that really come together to exacerbate conditions. And when you look out in the valley in the western part of the state, where those more intense rainfall events have had some pretty devastating impacts, as I think many of you have seen in the news. So the challenge to our communities is immense. It's an economic threat, and it's a quality of life threat, and as you heard Joe mention at the top of the hour, it's a water quality threat. All of that additional water carries with it sediment and nutrients. The rising waters along our coastal communities threaten really critical ecosystems and wetlands. So it's a double whammy for us in that we are seeing that death by 1,000 cuts to water quality exacerbated by the influx of additional water. The other challenge that we're really facing when it comes to responding to climate change is that those communities that are, many of the communities that are most impacted by climate change are the communities that have the least amount of resources to respond. And that is, unfortunately, in many instances by design. I think many of you are probably familiar with redlining and the consequences that had in urban areas, consolidating communities and then really creating vulnerable communities by pouring a lot of cement and putting a lot of infrastructure around these areas that makes it so water doesn't have any place to go. When you turn to rural communities, the problem is similar in that the lands that didn't perk, the lands that had all the mosquitoes where the water already was, well, those are the lands that we gave to people from Black and brown communities. And so now, as the waters continue to rise, those communities, many of them environmental justice or of low income, simply are being impacted more than other areas, and they don't have the resources to respond. So that's another major challenge that we're looking at in the resilience space. I would also note, since we are at a conservation network event, that we are looking at over half of our wetlands being wiped out because of sea level rise gains in the coming years. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the carbon sequestration slide, but I want to note that the figures are eye-popping in terms of natural resource impacts as a result of climate change. So what is the policy solution? This came up early. If you all are on the energy call, someone else is going to say this, but let me say it first and loudly. Virginia needs to stay in RGGI. We absolutely have to stay in RGGI. For those of you that don't know, this goes in two directions. Part of this goes to energy efficiency. What we're talking about right now, 45% of RGGI proceeds goes to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. That is the first and only state revenue that goes to resilience work in Virginia. Before that fund, there was no dollars for communities to develop a resilience plan, to get the outside expertise needed to adjust to these dynamic conditions, and to start putting shovel-ready projects on the ground. And so I can't stress enough how important it is that these dollars continue to come in. And the reason it's important is in the past, resilience work has we've only been able to accomplish it after a disaster. If you wanted money for resilience, you had to wait for a hurricane, you had to wait for a flood, and then you go to the federal government and say, gosh, we had this horrific event, can you help us build back better? RGGI gives us the opportunity to avoid those horrible outcomes and to actually build our communities in a manner that can learn to live with the water and better respond to it before these events occur. Also, sea level rise does not have an expiration date, folks. This is not something that you can just throw a pot of money at and it's done. This curve continues indefinitely. So when we think about resilience, we have to integrate it into all government processes. It has to be something that we're thinking about in all future planning. And so the idea that our funding would come in starts and fits is extremely problematic. So again, RGGI, absolutely crucial. And in case you care about things like climate change, for the record, RGGI does in fact draw down our carbon emissions over time as well, despite what you might have seen in the paper. So I think that is a crucial item. Additional sources and general funds also need to be identified because RGGI, while very helpful, is nowhere near what Virginia needs to respond to these climate impacts. Next item is increasing staff to help localities with resilience implementation. We have communities across Virginia that do not even have a single planner, let alone someone who has expertise in climate impacts, the ability to translate changes to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act and Living Shorelines Ordinance. We need staff at the state level who can help our localities to navigate this sort of dynamic planning world that we are in now, in that the conditions are constantly changing. Additionally, there are big pots of federal money right now that I'm sure most of you are aware of. These dollars flow specifically to localities and they need technical assistance to bring those dollars in. So providing state level staff to make sure Virginia is getting as much of that federal pots of money brought into our state for climate response is critically important. Also, we still have a lot of communities that do not recognize the dynamic nature of climate change. So incorporating climate change into long-term planning processes like your comprehensive plans is essential. Otherwise, your plan isn't very good if it does not account for those changes that are coming. And as I've already mentioned, we have a huge issue with, sorry, I think I lost my screen here. We have a huge issue with making sure that the communities that really need assistance get assistance. The General Assembly did pass a bill in this last session to create an outreach and engagement plan. We need to make sure that they are targeting those DEIJ, environmental justice, and low income vulnerable communities to make sure their voice is heard and their projects are in the queue for funding. All right. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A. I'm going to switch us in a completely different direction now, but it is tied together. If I can.
While Jay's getting his screen set up, I'm going to go ahead and pitch. If you want a hard copy of our common agenda, or register for any future webinar series that will be every Thursday, I'm going to drop that in the chat here for everybody.
Okay, I think I'm good. So sequestering carbon, and I'm going to go ahead and say right at the outset, I appreciate that many people may have watched Kiss the Ground and that Woody Harrelson told you that this is all about soil. Don't send me hate mail, but I am going to present carbon sequestration from the perspective of long-term natural resource preservation. And for, as policy reasons that we'll unpack here, soil is probably not our top target, even though it is in the mix. So again, no hate mail, but happy to unpack it in the future. So for recklessly fast overview, carbon sequestration through our natural resources is, let me pull these down, is when we take a natural process, be it the development of wetlands, the growth of a forest, or the holding organic material in our soils, and we are locking up carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere through natural processes. So there are a number of ways to do that. Some of the most efficient are growing trees. Our wetlands are highly effective at sequestering carbon. The reason being is it's saltwater and it's an anaerobic environment with water. So it's essentially like pickling carbon on a large scale basis. And our soils can carry a lot of carbon if managed properly. The things, when we're talking about a policy for Virginia, there's some really important things we want to focus on. And so they're really the durability of the practice. So if we lock up carbon, will it stay locked up? How hard is it to reintroduce to the atmosphere? And the other term is additionality. Is the new practice actually sequestering new carbon, or are we just trying to count something we've already done? So those are really important. And again, it's one of the reasons we really push towards forests and wetlands as our blue carbon and carbon sequestration preferred methodologies. So the challenge, I think the big one, is climate change. We all know that. I point out that it is also the building block of all life. That's pretty important because that is why we can do this through natural resources. We also, by locking up carbon, can get a lot of co-benefits in water quality, and air quality, quality of life, the way our state looks. There's a lot of co-benefits to pursuing carbon sequestration through the natural resources. And we're really just at the start of this process. Many of you have probably heard of carbon markets, heard of things that have gone wrong in carbon markets. Again, that's why additionality and durability are really important when Virginia talks about working in this space. So what are some potential policy actions that Virginia could take to help jumpstart our sequestration efforts? First of all, let me say DOF figures that in each year in Virginia, 20% of our carbon emissions are locked up by growth in our forests across the state. So it's not an insubstantial amount of carbon. The problem is that the other 80% of our emissions, they're just in the atmosphere and we're not doing anything about them right now. So the goal is, how does Virginia look across all of our resource assets and start to grow that sequestration number year to year? So the first thing is Virginia agencies should inventory their current assets' carbon sequestration value. So MRC has wetlands, DOF has forests, we have agricultural lands, we have all kinds of state parks. There are known practices to improve the sequestration value on existing assets. So we want our agencies to do that and come back and say, hey, these are our recommendations for how we could increase the sequestration value on Virginia lands. The other one is we should adopt targets for sequestration across state assets. Right now, we are losing canopy year to year. We are losing wetlands year to year. So we are sequestering more in certain sectors, but the big pie is going in the wrong direction. So we need to look at each of our asset sectors and say, Here's what we want to accomplish over time. We want to continue to grow our sequestration value, and then we can start to chart a roadmap to get there. Additionally, we want our agencies to take a look at their existing programs. So the ways they give out grants, the way they manage lands, all the things they're currently doing, and really just audit it to see if there's a best practice they could add to account for carbon sequestration. And this is a big one, and one that we're hearing a lot is right now carbon credits are issued on such a huge scale. Many markets won't talk to you until you're at 1,000 acres or more. But we have a lot of small landowners and smaller farmers across Virginia that would love to pursue the soil health or forest canopy benefits, and could use the additional financial incentive to get there, even if it's just to help offset the cost of trees on their land. And so we'd love to see the state take a leadership role here and provide tools, a resource for small landowners to either easily access these markets or to be aggregated and be able to access some of the larger markets. And so we really want this to be as easy as possible for people who want to plant trees and improve their soil health. And the state has a role here to take a really complicated process and make it more accessible to people. All right, those were a recklessly fast run through on two complicated topics. Happy to answer any questions we might have.
I don't think it was so reckless. Thanks, Jay, for all that. So got 4 questions so far. Feel free to add more into the Q&A down below. Becky asks, where should these statewide resiliency experts sit, meaning in what department or departments?
Sure, that's a great question. And that is something the state's sort of struggling with right now. In fact, just a week or so ago, the DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, put out a notice that they are pulling together a resilience entity work group that's going to tackle some of these questions about how we should best quarterback resilience efforts in Virginia and how we reach across agencies and secretariats, because resilience exists in many different places in Virginia government. For the purposes of staff, in the immediate need is really with those permitting agencies. So the Virginia Marine Resource Commission and DEQ, VMRC, they issue the living shoreline permit, the tidal wetlands permit. And this is a new area. Legislation just 2 years ago moved Virginia towards more resilient solutions by essentially requiring living shorelines unless science indicated it wasn't a good answer. Similar changes to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act put resilience regs in place for the first time. So these are 2 permitting agencies. And so that's an area where people are going to have a lot of interface with the government. So we think those should be prioritized for technical assistance. Additionally, DCR, they, as I mentioned, are working on an outreach and engagement plan, and they have no staff to do that work currently. And so that is a huge hole in a statutory obligation, and we think they should be hiring outreach and engagement staff, and we hope that there's some money to allow them to do so in the next budget, because it's a massive undertaking, and we want to make sure people don't fall through the cracks.
Great. Monique has a question. She's asking, are there any good arguments for getting local authorities to focus on current escalating flooding and weather trends? And mentions that her local leaders say that they already have building zoning for 100-year and 10-year events, despite recent examples of burst storms causing significant damage.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk exactly about this with the House Appropriations Committee yesterday, and I think the best argument is if you continue to go down the path of, building a bigger stormwater pipe and trying to move the water quicker, you're just going to be back here in 10 years. So it's really a monetary argument, is that if your locality is looking for long-term viability and long-term financial resilience, you got to start to think outside of a 10 to 20 year horizon, because you can build a community that can live with the water and do a much better job dealing with the excess rainfall and or coastal flooding. And it will save you a lot of money over time. These practices become more and more expensive each time we have to do it. And so some communities are looking at their third time upgrading stormwater pipe diameter. That's crazy. And so that means they went and dug up the ground twice and paid for a project 3 times, when if we had designed for the long term, we could have saved a lot of money for that locality.
Thank you, Jay. Question from George. What group in Virginia should be tasked with the suggestion to help smaller landowners enter into carbon markets?
Great question, George. I don't think we have any agency people on here, so I'm not worried about making enemies, but it's likely DOF is Department of Forestry is most qualified for that task. And that's for 2 reasons. One, Department of Forestry is one of the first agencies to start participating in carbon markets for the lands they hold. So they're familiar with the process. They also have great modeling and GIS capabilities for Virginia, so they would be able to pull to easily identify smaller landholders that would be eligible for these programs. But I also should note, we have continuously encouraged that any agency that's involved in carbon markets report that data to DEQ as a central clearinghouse. DEQ holds Virginia's greenhouse gas inventory, and we think it's really important that there's someone quarterbacking Virginia's carbon diet overall. So those 2 agencies.
All right, Becky asks, she's working with the city of Richmond to define a curbside composting program, and is intending to think broadly and rightly about the impact of that work. So her question is coming from that perspective. So when it comes to soil carbon sequestration, do you have any thoughts on statewide composting programs that deliver Virginia-created fertilizer into the agricultural community to regenerate soil and to draw down carbon as meaningful, or is that a reach?
Well, it's definitely meaningful. Composting has been continuously flagged as a shortfall of the Commonwealth. If my memory serves correctly, some of us saw a presentation just a week or so ago in which of all of Virginia's waste streams, only 1% goes to composting. That's essentially a rounding error when you get to that level. And composting programs means we're not getting those nutrients in landfills, which are ultimately making their way to water sources. So it's already a good. The devil's in the details when it comes to getting increasing carbon in the soil. The biggest trick is not disturbing the soil. And that is the problem, is you can actually get a lot of gains in soil carbon quickly through things like composting. But the moment you till that soil, you're losing a lot of that carbon back to the atmosphere. And so that is a really important caveat when we talk about soil health, is that it really requires a wholesale change in how we approach the management of soil and preparing for a year. So I think it's a great idea. I think figuring out your end user is very important, and understanding that there's guardrails and how it's applied over time, so it's you maximize the benefits.
Thanks, Jay. Scott has a question asking, does biofertilizer have a role in improving soil quality?
Would it be possible, Scott, for you to give us a little more on what you mean by biofertilizer. I could think of a lot of things that would fall under a biological fertilizer category. You know, in my region on the Eastern Shore, a lot of times we're human waste. Okay, good. So we are talking about human poop. You know, I'm gonna say that question remains to be seen. You know, there's certainly a lot of interest in that, but I think there's still a lot of technological hurdles. And right now, the best thing we can do is make sure our wastewater systems are operating at max efficiency until the science catches up with that particular bin of poo.
I'll add in on that just a little bit. Biosolids, as they're commonly marketed today, it's essentially sewage sludge. One of the issues that was brought up earlier with PFAS is that biosolids are being found to also contain some toxic substances, including PFAS. So aside from the carbon sequestration or soil amendment values, there are certainly concerns outside of that as to what might be in biosolids or sewage sludge. So good question. All right, I have no more questions at this point. I want to thank all our presenters here today, and thank you for your time and more work ahead. Hopefully you'll join us in future Thursdays, but I'm going to hand it over to Andrew with VCN to tell us a little bit more about, okay, now you got a little bit of information here, now what?
Thanks, Pat, and hello to everybody. Thank you all so much to our speakers for a really fabulous event today. Really appreciated hearing everything you had to say and all the contributions that you all are giving to the environmental community here in Virginia. For folks who don't know me, my name is Andrew Perot. I'm the Civic Engagement Manager with Virginia Conservation Network, and I'm here today just to plug a couple of resources for folks who want to get engaged after these educational series. There's a ton of things that we heard today, and if there is any that specifically resonated with you, whether it's defending RGGI, fighting for environmental justice, fighting for an equitable budget, all three, or even more, ton of ways to get involved with VCN and our partners between now and the next General Assembly next year. So I'm going to paste some links here in the chat. First one is Who's My Legislator? That is the most important link I think you can use today to determine who your state legislator is, who your local local representative is for your delegate district, excuse me. Finding out these folks and contacting them and constantly telling them what you support and why you support it is going to go a really long way the next time the General Assembly meets. So if you don't already know, please make sure to check that link there. Our second link is our vote page with VCN. This is we have an extremely important election coming up in Virginia in just under a month. This page here, you can determine if you're registered to vote, and if you're not, how to register to vote, and you can also determine all the important deadlines. The next deadline that's coming up is the 17th, which is next Monday. That is the deadline to register to vote online. The really important thing about this to know is that this year in Virginia, this is the first time that you can actually register to vote on election day and cast a ballot at the same time. So I wouldn't wait, but if you do end up waiting and you're worried that you're not able to register and vote, this year you're able to. So keep a lookout for that. And then the final link that I've shared there is our Take Action page, which I'm actually going to briefly just share my screen with you all just so you can kind of take a look at what I'm talking about here. So just give me one moment. What I'm about to show you is how you can take a look at our website, figure out ways to get involved virtually. So just give me 10 seconds, I promise. Okay. That is not what I wanted. Give me just a second here. Okay. So if you can see our screen here, this is our Take Action and Common Agenda Education Series homepages on our website here. You can check this out to look out how to register to vote through that vote link that I just sent you. You can download pieces of our Common Agenda series or the entire Common Agenda on our site there too. We also have a ton of different guides here at the bottom, our 101 assembly, civic engagement, and media advocacy. These are all ways that you are able to, you or your organizations can take a look at how to advocate for these issues that you care about even further. So again, thank you all to our speakers and participants today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And if there's anything else from any of the panelists, you can feel free to reach out to them. I will hand things over to Kyle now.
Hi, folks. We are reaching the end of our presentation. I'm going to share my screen just real fast. If you have any more questions about any of the papers that were mentioned today or that are mentioned in any of the videos that you watch of our breakdowns, our education series, please feel free to reach out to the authors, or if for some reason you can't reach them, reach out to a VCN team member and we'll make sure you get to the correct person. Next week, on Thursday, the 20th, we will be doing our land use and transportation event. Same time, same place, same bat channel and whatnot. And as you can see, we'll be having a Trip Pollard, Bob Kitchen, Blair Olson, Jen Million, and finally Victoria Higgins. So come out and watch. But without any more questions, please feel free to go have lunch and go back into the world. Thank you for coming for our event, and hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye.